I love being in Tower of Power.
That's Mike Bogart on trumpet!
Going out and playing taps at a funeral. The classic rock and roll cliche, got addicted to drugs and alcohol.
Victoria Bitter, Carlton Dry.
That's the problem. It does work. President Carter and his wife Rosalind were standing right there, and he turned to me and he said, "Good evening.
Great citizens.
Down and out.
Never surrender.
He's done it.
Famous victory. We're going to come back.
Turn to glory.
I'm here with musician first class, Michael Bogart, United States Navy, retired. But before retiring, there was an illustrious career of, as you can see, quite some glitter and glamour, and I'm sure some intensity too. So if you don't mind sharing us a little bit of your story and telling us the experiences of being in the US military and what that all means.
When I first came into the Navy, they didn't have this kind of infrastructure at all. I came in 1988.
So when you were 6 or 7.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. No, I was in my 20s already, and I remember being on a ship. This was like one of those watershed landmark moments for me. I wasn't raised religious. I was raised with very little knowledge of Yiddishkeit whatsoever. And it's 1993, and my Jewish soul, my Yiddish neshama, had just started to wake up. And I knew that I wanted to learn something about what Judaism was. So I was getting ready to get deployed on the USS Blue Ridge, LCC 19, for a fairly lengthy deployment. I went to the bookstore on base, and they had a small little religion section on base, and there was one book on Judaism, and it was basically like a Judaism 101, Judaism for Dummies, Intro to Judaism, whatever you want to call it. I bought it, and I brought it on the ship with me. And then I also managed to I found a book. I was able to copy out the Aleph base on the little flashcards I made myself. So I wanted to learn how to read Hebrew. So that's all I had with me on the ship. I had this book, and I had these flashcards. It's handmade flashcards to learn Aleph base. So I'm reading this book, and everything I'm reading in it, I'm vibing with. Like, it's all like really resonating with me. I just finished reading the chapter on Shabbat, and the ship pulled into Hong Kong Harbor on a Friday morning. I was, junior enlisted, so by the time I finally got off the ship, all the officers, then the senior enlisted, and finally it was our turn. It was already like creeping up to like Friday afternoon. And I walk out, and I know that sundown Friday night is Shabbat, but like I already knew I was the only Jew on the ship, and I felt very lonely.
How many people were on the ship, do you reckon?
It's a small ship. You know what? I don't want to speak. I'm not 100% sure.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. No. I wish I could remember those.
I was more asking to kind of show the situation that a lot of people come into, whereby they are the only Jew amongst hundreds or even thousands.
I think, if memory serves me right, I believe we had somewhere between 600 and maybe 800 people on board the ship. That includes ship's crew and also 7th Fleet staff. Right. Because basically what the USS Blue Ridge was and still is serving actually as it's the floating office for Commander 7th Fleet, commander of all the 7th Fleet forces for the Pacific. So you have the admiral staff, but then you also have ship's crew. So I think both of them combined, I think it was somewhere around 600 to 800 people. The ship is about the size of a small World War II era aircraft carrier. So it's a fairly large ship. Again, I don't remember the beam. Anyhow. So I was on this deployment, and I had this book, and I had these flashcards, and I just finished reading the chapter on Shabbat, and the ship pulls into Hong Kong Harbor on a Friday, and I already felt like kind of a sense of loneliness and isolation because this is before Aleph has any kind of infrastructure in place. I didn't even know if I didn't know how to contact any other Jews. I didn't know, this was before there actually was a Jewish chaplain who was assigned to that region. His name is Seth Phillips. He's retired now. And he, once a quarter, he would come to our home port, which was in Yokosuka, Japan, and he'd spend Shabbat with us, and I would pester him all weekend with questions. But that was it. But this was before I even met him. So the ship pulls in, and I walk out into Hong Kong, and I have no way of finding out, even if there's a synagogue, but I knew that sundown was going to be Shabbat, and I wanted to experience, I had this like inner urge and desire to experience Shabbat and do something Jewish. And I remember I sat down and there was just like a sea of like thousands of Chinese faces, and I sat down, and I remember I closed my eyes and I thought, I've got to be the only Jew in Hong Kong. And I opened my eyes, and there's a chassid in a black kapata holding running right in front of me. I went running up to him and I said, is there a synagogue somewhere? And he goes, yeah, come with me. And he grabs my arm.
Oh, wow.
And so now I'm looking for a synagogue, and in the middle of Hong Kong. I'm not seeing a synagogue. We're making a beeline for the Hilton Hotel.
Yeah.
And so we get to the hotel, and there we went up to, like, I think it was on the second floor. There was a double suite that Chabad had been renting out. The shliach there, Rabbi Mordecai Opson, who's still the shliach in Hong Kong, was conducting services, and I walked in and I just immediately felt at home, and I didn't have to work that weekend, so I basically camped out in that suite in the Hilton Hotel for the whole weekend. Some Sunday morning comes, and Rabbi Opson he asked if I had a bar mitzvah, and I said no. He asked me if I'd ever put on tefillin, and I probably answered, I don't know what those are. And he pulls out these black boxes and he starts wrapping them on my arm, and I immediately felt a connection to something. Now, this was in '93, so this was a year before Gimel Thomas. This is a year before that. So the Rebbe was still on this plane of existence. And I believe now that, like, we know how crucial and how important the mitzvah of tefillin was to the Rebbe, especially with anything with regards to military.
Ze gehen mit dem Deckel, beshem Weile keiner Nidgel, betrug mir, wie sie gewähnt, angeschrieben, Mika, Mecha, Bakelim, Hawaii, geht mir nechet mit Shem Hawaii, zusammen wie das ist, Mikro Lecher durch Anoches Tefillin, Lemale Shlichusam HaGdesha LaHagona, al bitochen von Eretz HaKodesh und bitochen von Gei Kodesh, was gefindt sich in Eretz HaKodesh.
Israel, roughly the size of New Jersey, was surrounded by an Arab world 50 times its size. But in 6 days, the war was over.
It's the first time in 19 years that Jews have been allowed to visit and pray at the site of the sacred Wailing Wall.
So I felt this, like, connection immediately. And that really was like the defining moment for me as far as, like, really kickstarting my interest in learning Yiddishkeit. Now, the postscript to this story, and I'm going to fast forward now, 32 years later, I'm a full-on, like, chassid of the Rebbe, and I'm in Crown Heights. It's the week of my chasana to my wife, who is from the community in Montreal. We were in Crown Heights to get married at 770, and it was the last day that we could be together before we had to separate for the week.
Yeah.
So I decided, I was staying in an apartment on East New York. I decided I'm going to go daven shacharis at 770. I come down and I get all the way. I was staying on the 4th floor. I come down to the 1st floor. I realized I forgot, of all things, I forgot my tefillin. So I go running back up to the 4th floor, grab my tefillin, come running down, open the door to the sidewalk on East New York, and literally almost bump into Rabbi Mordecai Opson.
No way.
And I recognized him. He did not recognize me, but I recognized him. And I said, Rabbi Opson. He turns around and he said, do I know you? I said, you're not going to believe this, but 32 years ago, you put tefillin on me in Hong Kong.
I'm getting literal goosebumps.
And it changed my life. And now here I am about to get married at 770. And it's all because 32 years ago, you put tefillin on me.
Wow.
And my wife, like I said, it was the last day that we could see each other. So we had lunch with him at a little restaurant in Crown Heights, and him and his wife. And he got to tell me, how meaningful it was for him. He says, as shluchim, we plant seeds, and we very rarely get to see what happens down the line. But he says, now here we are 32 years later. And he said it was so gratifying for him to see that seed that got planted and how it's grown. And now I'm getting, ready to be married. And It was,
I've got literal goosebumps up my arm. Like that is an incredible story.
Yeah,
Complete divine
100%.
providence. There's no question about it.
No question about it. Yeah.
Wow.
As far as my career, I mean, I've been so blessed. I served for 10 years as a musician, as a trumpet player in the Navy band. First with the Navy band in Guam, and then 7th Fleet Japan. I was there for 5 years. Then I did 1 year with the Navy band in San Diego. At that point, I was starting to work in the civilian music industry, and my end game was never to stay in the Navy. I was always just like something I was going to do until something better came along. Well, that something better came along, and so I decided at the end of my enlistment, I didn't renew my contract. At 10 years, I got out. I left the Navy, and I was able to start touring and recording. There was a group that I grew up listening to. I loved. It was a band called Tower of Power. I had all their albums, and then the next thing you know, I was invited to become a member of the band. So I joined the band.
What do you play?
I play trumpet.
Oh, no way.
So I played lead trumpet and trombone. I also double on trombone. I was with them for 9 years. I recorded 4 albums with them, toured all over the world, and then
You can listen on Spotify.
you can. And in fact, just a quick shameless plug. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but I ended up rejoining the band for a very short time in 2021, and we recorded the last recording project I did with them. We recorded Maut Sor for their holiday album, and it was released just before Hanukkah, this last Hanukkah, and it's done very, very well. The album charted on the Billboard jazz charts, and it's probably the first time that Maut Sor. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, probably the first time since Matas Yol that a song like that is charted.
Exactly. And the first time that like an American non-Jewish band has ever decided to record a Jewish song. Except somebody told me that that's not true. I guess Fish did like something. I don't know.
I'm sure Fish do a lot of that. I mean, a lot of that kind of.
But I don't know if the Fish.
John Farnham sang Yiddish Mama.
And I know that I owe everything that I am today to that dear little lady, soul and so great. I can't go on, you finish your tongue.
To that wonderful Yiddish mama.
I'm loving this.
So anyhow, so getting back, I left the Navy.
Aussie plug if you do that.
No, understandable. I loved being in Tower of Power, but it was also personally, it was a very challenging time for me. I unfortunately succumbed to the classic rock and roll cliche, and I got addicted to drugs and alcohol, and I really struggled with it. In 2007, I came into recovery, and I came into 12-step recovery, and I got clean and sober, and it saved my life until a little road bump, 7 years later, which I'll talk about a little bit because it's part of my story, but. In 2009, the Navy actually reached out to me. They said, hey, we have a job with the Navy band in Annapolis, Maryland at the United States Naval Academy. And, we think you're musically qualified for this. And it'll be a promotion to E6. And you'll be able to stay in, finish out your 10 years and get a retirement. And at that time in my life, after having just gone through a very, very challenging time and coming out the other end of it and feeling very, very grateful, it felt like going back into some kind of service position and giving back a little bit, plus being able to earn a paycheck and also a retirement sounded like it made a lot of sense. So I left Tower of Power. I went back in the Navy. I was at the United States Naval Academy for 3 years, had an incredible thing happen there with former President Jimmy Carter. And then I decided I wanted to shift gears a little bit and go into mental health. It was something, especially substance abuse counseling and helping others who had struggled with some of the same issues that I had struggled with. So the Navy had a program. They sent me to school. I got certified as a drug and alcohol counselor. And I worked at a 28-day residential treatment facility in Southern California. All of our patients were active duty. Most of them were coming back from combat, dual diagnosed with combat PTSD and some kind of substance use disorder, usually alcoholism. And it was some of the most rewarding work I think I ever did.
Wow.
Not just in the military, but in my life. And then in 2014, I decided to, this is hard to talk about, but I lost a very, very close family member to a heroin overdose in 2013. I no longer felt that at that time I could be effective as a counselor, especially
too raw.
Exactly. And so at my request, I was able to leave counseling. I went back to a Navy band. I struggled once more again with this disease. And then after getting clean and sober again, someone handed me a copy of Rabbi Shais Taub's book, God of Our Understanding. I think it's subtitled Jewish Spirituality and the 12 Steps of Recovery. And I read that book cover to cover within like a day, and all of a sudden everything clicked for me, because up until that point I had my Jewish spirituality over here in this box, and I had my 12-step recovery spirituality over here in this box, but they didn't necessarily have any common ground, right? And Rabbi Taub, in a beautiful way, brings these two together and shows exactly how compatible they really are. And that book, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that book probably saved my life.
Wow.
And I ended up becoming friends with Rabbi Taub. He was actually my escort, because my father passed away. He was my escort to the chuppah when I got married at 770, and we're in very close touch today. And he's had a huge influence on me and my life, and more than I think anybody has brought the Torah, the Rebbe, to a level that I can understand, and I'm grateful for that.
That's beautiful. I want to come back to the band side of things.
Sure.
And serving in the band, and what that style of giving back, that style of service is like, and what that means for you personally on an internal level while you're doing it.
You know, a lot of times it's hard to find the motivation, I think. It's hard to try to figure out how music plays, because basically we're either, most military bands are either background music for a bunch of four-star admirals getting together and having a, meeting with dignitaries.
Yeah.
And, people are constantly coming over to you telling you to, play quieter. Or we're playing marches for a ceremony, a retirement ceremony, change of command ceremony, or something like that. Those are a little bit easier to find the motivation for, but I think for me, luckily as a trumpet player, going out and playing taps at a funeral was spiritually the most rewarding and important work that I did as a musician, as a Navy band member. And it's unique that it's only trumpet players that go out and do it. And the joke that I used to tell people was, because nobody wants to hear taps played on an oboe, it's just doesn't have the same kind of impact as hearing it played on a trumpet. I think over the course of my 20-year career, I would probably estimate I've played taps at 500 funerals or memorial events. Most of them are people who are veterans who served 4 years and died of natural causes. I played for a lot of Vietnam veterans that passed away just from old age. But of course, having served during two periods where the United States was at war or in conflict, the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War, I also had to play at a fair number of active duty funerals of young service members that were killed in combat. And those are very challenging. Those were, you walk in and you do okay, you're standing at attention and they're giving the eulogy, and then all of a sudden the chaplain looks over at the firing detail. They bring the firing detail to attention. They do the salute, and then that's where it would start to hit me. I was stationed at the United States Naval Academy from, like I was saying, from 2009 to 2012. And while I was there, they had the Class of 46 class reunion. Part of every class reunion, they have a memorial service, and they do a roll call of the members of that class that had passed away. So the week that the class of 46 had their reunion was my week to be the duty bugler. So I knew I was going to have to play taps for the memorial service in the United States Naval Academy Chapel, which is this beautiful acoustics, double balcony with a organ and everything. Anyhow, and so the buglers, we would always situate ourselves up in the balcony next to the organ to take advantage of the acoustics. And also so I could have a good view of the service taking place down there. So I heard the last name that was being called, and then I was going to play taps after that last name. As soon as I heard the last name, I put the horn up, played taps. I felt after I finished that it was pretty good. I was pretty happy with the job that I'd done. I was packing my horn up. And the Secret Service agent came running upstairs to the balcony, and she said, "Excuse me, if you don't mind, if you have a second, President Carter would like to have a word with you."
If you have a second, if you don't mind, the big,
something like that. Yeah, they were very polite. I was like, "Yeah, let me check my schedule." No, I mean, it's president.
You got to speak to my PA, but after that,
right. So I felt very honored. I really wasn't sure what it was he wanted to say or ask me, but I came downstairs, and the President Carter and his wife Rosalind were standing right there, and he turned to me and he said, "I just wanted you to know that in all my years of public service, that was the most beautiful taps I ever heard." And I felt very humbled and grateful that he wanted to take the time to tell me that, because it was one of the nicest things and one of the most validating things I think I've ever heard in my career as a trumpet player, both in the Navy and outside the Navy.
Wow. I to touch on that idea and also the emotional impact that playing has. I think it's something that as the public, we don't really even necessarily think about, if we're going to be honest. You kind of watch it, you see the movements, and they go into motion. You guys go into motion. You do the tune, but to actually think of the behind. And the toll and the impact that it has. And I was mentioning earlier about there's an Australian tune that I've always heard growing up, The Last Post. It brings most Australians to almost to tears, which I'm sure taps is the same here in the United States. And to hear what that means on your side is very enlightening and very, very interesting. Well, let's talk a bit about the mental health side of things as the specific role of mental health and of dealing with recovery. Mm-hmm. I think it would be very, very helpful for people to understand what that day-to-day is and what that's like.
Well,
and
I can speak
some advice. I mean,
I'm happy to. Let me address this, I think, more so from the standpoint of somebody who has struggled and been in recovery myself, and what has worked for me. Because ultimately, that's probably the most powerful experience that I can share, is what has worked for me. And I won't put on my counselor cap right now. And again, going back to what Rabbi Taub talks about in the book God of Our Understanding, for me, the key component to getting sober and staying sober is the spiritual component. It's no secret that 12-step recovery, while not 100% successful, is probably the most successful recovery program for any kind of addiction. It's got a pretty good batting average. The reason I believe for that is because it's a spiritual program. If what I had was only a mental health issue, if addiction was only a mental health issue, I could go and I could sit on a therapist's couch for a couple thousand hours, and I would probably be cured.
I thought you were going to say dollars, but that's about the same.
A couple $1,000 or a couple thousand hours, however you want to, however you want to spin that. And I could probably, be cured. If what I had was only a physical illness, I could go detox 72 hours later, walk out of the detox, and I would be cured. But it has a physical component, it has a mental component, but first and foremost, what I have is I have a spiritual illness that requires a spiritual solution. So I have to address the physical, I have to address the mental, but I also have to address that spiritual component. That, as we talk, like what we say in recovery, that God-shaped hole that's in me that I keep trying to fill with alcohol or with drugs or with pornography or with gambling or with any of the other myriad ways I try to fill this hole that really can only be filled with God. It can only be filled on a spiritual basis. And until I find that, because here's the thing. Most alcoholics and addicts, you hear this all the time in the rooms. You hear phrases like, I'm not comfortable in my own skin, even as a child. When I was a kid, I would walk into a room full of people and I would feel like I was a stranger, even if they were family members. We yearn for some kind of connection, some kind of spiritual connection. And for a lot of us, for me, I know, any kind of social situation was extremely awkward. And then all of a sudden I take that shot, or I have a beer, and about 2 beers in, all of a sudden all that awkwardness is gone. And all of a sudden I feel alive. And I feel like, oh, okay, I'm actually a part of the human race. Like, I can connect with you. I can talk to you. I'm all of a sudden I can walk up to that woman and speak to her. All these things that I can't do when I'm sober and that I can't feel when I'm sober. I get a couple of drinks in me and it works. That's the problem. It does work. See, alcohol and drugs and addiction, it's not the problem. It's the solution to the problem.
It's about finding a different solution.
It's about finding a different solution. The real solution, the only real solution, because they mimic very, very well the spiritual connection that I really need, and that I really need, that I'm really craving. That if I don't replace it with the real thing, with a real connection to a higher power, then I'm probably doomed to failure.
You could be using scissors to cut your grass and it will work, but your arm will hurt, so use a lawnmower.
Right.
And that's kind of the idea, finding the right solution.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that you see with friends, especially as you get older, like that they struggle with, and then there's also, I think, people have that balance of trying to work out, and this, anyone who doesn't think about this, I think, is probably being a bit dishonest to themselves, but working out, okay, what is my limit, and can I drink, or is it too much, or when you go out, like I drink. Yeah. You'll see on Friday night I like to have a bit of a bit of a drink or two, but you definitely have to, if you go over the line, have that perspective of have you gone over the line, and where is that line for you, and really have a perspective, or it can spiral. But that point which I find really interesting is that you've brought up that it's a solution to a problem and a hole, and I think that's where, and I could be wrong, so please tell me if I'm wrong, but this is what I'm taking out of it. That's where possibly the difference is in having the disease or just liking a bit of a drink, is that it's not really trying to fix a hole. It's not trying to fix a problem. It's fun. And a few drinks are a good time, kind of a thing.
I don't know, because I'm not a normal drinker.
Right.
But if I had to guess, I'd say you're probably on the right track. It somehow, like on a spiritual, like on a deep soul level, feels differently for somebody who's not an addict.
It sounds like that's what it sounds like. I'm having the discussion.
Yeah.
But that's what it sounds like. It's a difference in kind of perspective of having a drink.
Right. I mean, we can, we have criteria that when somebody comes in, when I was working as a counselor, we would have to determine whether or not they actually fit the criteria for our services. And we have a whole list of questions that, and, you can quantify it. But the bottom line is really, it's up to the individual. See, that's the thing. It's a disease whose the first symptom of this disease is tell me I don't have a disease. So it's very, very tricky.
Exactly.
It's very tricky. And it's a disease that ultimately only I can admit to having or not.
Yeah, all
and
interventions in the world at the end of the day.
At the end of the day, it's, until the person is ready to admit to themselves, that's the first step. We admitted to ourselves that we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. Until I'm ready to get to that first step, that I admit to myself that I'm an alcoholic, that I have a problem. There isn't anything that anybody can tell me. Now, I was given a very, very key piece of information and piece of advice about 3 months before I finally hit bottom from one of the original members of Tower of Power, who had been in recovery at that point for close to 20 years. And I remember going up to him backstage and asking him point blank. See, I'd been in the band for 7 years at that point, and they never once pulled me and grabbed me and said, Mike, you got a problem, you got to fix it, you're an alcoholic. None of that. They practiced one of the principles of 12-step recovery is attraction, not promotion.
Right.
Okay. So while the first 7 years I was on the band, while my life was gradually getting worse and worse and worse, I saw their lives getting better and better and better. So about 3 months before I finally hit bottom, I remember grabbing one of the original members who had been, like I said, been in recovery for many years. And he actually was the one who took me to my first meeting 3 months later when I finally hit bottom. It was just the two of us backstage. And I looked him in the eye and I just asked him point blank, am I an alcoholic? And he looked at me and he says, here's the thing, Mike. I can't tell you whether you're an alcoholic or not. That's something only you can figure out for yourself. But I can tell you this. People who are not alcoholic or who are not addicts, who are normal, never ask themselves that question. And that's really when the light bulb went off, because I'd been asking myself that question for a long time.
Right.
At least a decade. Am I an alcoholic? Do I have a problem? And turns out I did. The old Yiddish saying, "Shikar is a goy." Jews aren't drunks. Jews don't have this problem. Well, it turns out we do.
Oh, we definitely.
It's an equal opportunity disease.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of alcohol, especially in the culture and in the system. I mean, almost every festival revolves around some sort of drinking, and it's never meant to be excess, but that does come with it, and that is a factor. Talking about alcoholism with service members, are you able to touch on some stories, if possible, of people that you've been able to help and the hole that they were trying to plug with alcohol from their military service and the solution that they have now to plug that hole?
Here was the problem that I ran into as an active duty counselor working in a drug and alcohol rehab, is even though I myself found a spiritual solution to my problem, I couldn't necessarily talk about that. I couldn't necessarily say, look, what you have is it's actually, it's got a mental health component and it's got a physical dependency component, but what you have really is a spiritual problem. I couldn't say that as a counselor. Okay. And so actually my ability to, and I'm not comfortable talking about like any personal stories of any of my former patients, even though,
only what,
it's very difficult because like I said at the beginning, a lot of these folks, men and women, were coming back with dual diagnoses some kind of PTSD, sometimes combat PTSD, and then they were self-medicating. And we had 28 days to really try to get these folks put back together again before either rotating back to their unit, or a lot of them were actually on their way out, getting separated from the military. And it was very challenging work. So honestly, I don't know. The most I think I could hope for is that I planted some seeds, and that I gave some of my patients some things to think about, because we didn't have an aftercare program from this facility. If they were staying in, we would send them back. We would put them in touch with whoever was the SARP in their geographic right. But hopefully, if any of my patients got anything out of it, and if I was able to do any help and plant any seeds, that's the most that I could wish for. I'd like to think so.
Well, if any of you hear this, comment below, and maybe we'll have a Rabbi Austin moment.
Yeah, sure. And this is work that I would love to start maybe trying to help the Jewish community as a whole. I would love to, be doing this kind of work. I think the conversation
is happening a lot more. Like I know around my mates, there's a lot of that conversation of what is alcoholism, what's too much to have a drink at a Farbrengen or a Shabbos afternoon or something like that, or Friday nights. Where should that balance be? And I mean, we definitely have a good time. There's no, I'm not going to pretend for a moment that I'm some angel that like I said, you'll see Friday night. Yeah. I like to have a bit of, I'm Aussie.
One quick sea story about Australia. I spent 5 weeks on the same ship, the USS Blue Ridge, going around the coast of Australia. We did it in 5 weeks. Yeah. And we hit, major ports and I got back to Japan, and I found that I had a 1,000, and then this is like in the early 90s, I had a visa bill for $1,500 US dollars. And pretty much it was just spent on, pubs.
During the whole, down Australia. Well, what was the best beer? Victoria Bitter, Carlton Draft?
Actually, it was my first time trying cider. What was it, Strongbow?
Strongbow. Yeah, okay.
And so I was like all about the Strongbow because I think it was like 7 or 8% alcohol. Yeah.
One of the things that which I'll raise and hear your thoughts. That one of the things that we talk about is like, for example, when I'm struggling, or like when things are financially more difficult or something like that, we try not to drink and don't touch it as much, because we don't want that to be the solution to the problem. But when things are going well, then it's like, have a good time, and that's a much more healthy, normal approach, I think, to drinking, because my approach was just completely the opposite. And I think for a lot of alcoholics and addicts is when times are challenging, when times are difficult, that's when that God-shaped hole really starts to hurt. But then you always wake up, and that hole that was this big is now this big, and then the one that was this big is now this big.
Exactly.
And
that's the thing.
Keeps going.
Just keeps growing. And
yeah.
Right.
So I think it's definitely a question that people ask as you start getting to ages of what that line is.
Right. And I think an important thing to realize is that line is going to be different for every person. What might be normal drinking for one person and not a problem, and eventually they'll just stop on their own. Either they'll realize they have responsibilities and it will no longer be an issue or be a problem. Might be a completely different line for another person. That's a good thing. Every person kind of has to sort of, I guess, figure out what their relationship is with alcohol for themselves, and what that's going to look like in their life, And if at any point they start asking themselves, well, is this a healthy relationship? Do I have a healthy relationship with this? And if they continue to have that same sort of nagging question in the back of their head,
if you're waking up too many times thinking that, then
maybe you might want to talk to somebody.
Yeah, then there's a problem. Is there any other topics, maybe more military focused, that I didn't touch on that you'd like to talk about before we camera away?
I'm very, very grateful to the United States Navy for allowing me to go back in and for letting me finish out and serve my time and have the retirement that I have. I have a retirement and a quality of life that a lot of musicians, especially who aren't like necessarily playing, movie soundtracks or, sitting in a major symphony orchestra, like the majority of musicians, just working musicians, will never get to experience. I have that, and I'm very grateful for that. I would also like to just give a quick shout out to the Veterans Administration. I do have a disability rating through the VA, and my experience with the VA has been nothing but absolutely positive from the get-go.
Wow,
the VA, where I finally retired out of at Great Lakes, the VA in San Diego, California, in La Jolla, and also their satellite clinics, and now the VA where I'm at, the main VA hospital in Las Vegas, which is a fairly new facility. I think it's less than a decade old. Beautiful facilities, amazing staff, and I'm so grateful that I have this, that I've had this wonderful experience, because I don't think not every service member has had this a similar experience with their VA, wherever their VA
right.
is.
Yeah, no, definitely.
But my experience has been nothing but incredible and positive, and I just wanted to give that quick plug.
Well, thank you very, very much. I appreciate you sitting down with me, and
my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed the video.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking me to do this.